And so in 2020, I stopped battling with myself and my voice, and I finished putting the words together. I remember watching protests in particular in Atlanta, Georgia, in Washington, D.C., and my students that I had taught were leading those protests, were
Oh,
informing others of how to respond. And I thought, this is the power of a seed, that when we build every student for the brilliance that lives in them, when we find ways for them to advocate for themselves, first in the classroom and then in the world, that would be the message that is undergirding the power of universal design for learning. It is advocacy, it is expert learning, it is shifting the world for yourself and then having others come alongside to shift with you.
hi, thank you so much for joining the Falling for Learning podcast. I am TD Flenaugh. We have this podcast to help parents and caregivers with having the resources, strategies, and tools needed to make sure that their children are on track for learning and to stay on track for success. Thank you all for joining us on the Falling for Learning podcast. Today we have Andratesha Fritzgerald, and she is the author of Antiracism and Universal Design for Learning. And we're so excited to have her. She is a dynamic speaker and educator and parent, and we're so glad to have her to give us the insights that we need to make sure that our children are on track for learning and stay on track for success. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so we really want to start with thinking about yourself and what drew you into education as a child or into learning and the learning process.
I feel like what drew me into education as a whole was that um, there's something about seeing learners clarify a path for themselves that brings me joy and great passion. So I think that education satisfies my intellectual curiosity, but gives me the space to be a designer of learning and then transfer that design to learners who then get to go through that same process for themselves. As a child, I think what drew me fully into education is legacy.
Mm,
I went to a school and I had mostly Black teachers, but my kindergarten teacher in particular, which I talk about her often in my book, um, is also my mom's kindergarten teacher.
oh,
And
wow.
she went on to become the principal of the school where I went from kindergarten through eighth grade. And this woman believed that every child had both the capacity and the ingenuity to do anything. And so when I would see her every morning, she would kind of mine for the gem of brilliance that she felt like was inside of me. She wanted to know, what do we do? What do we learn? How do we practice? And she was always on this treasure hunt to find the best in each of us. The last time that I saw her, she passed away in the last few years. The last
Mm,
time that I saw her, uh, she knew exactly who I was, and I was just saying hello. Something about saying your kindergarten teacher makes you kind of turn into a kindergartner. So I was all like,
yeah.
"Hi, Mrs. Harris." She's like, "Hello, Andratesha." And then she invited me to sit down, and she asked me a question. She said, "What great things are you doing?" And there was still this assumption after all of these years and all of this
Mm,
time and all of this space that there were great things inside of me that were happening each day. And she
yeah.
sat with this great expectation. And so it's teachers like her that really, it's in their footsteps that I follow, on their shoulders that I stand, that really believe in the brilliance of every child. And then they mine for that brilliance, support that brilliance until that gem of brilliance shines.
All right. I love it. Wonderful. So, thinking about your book, um, Anti Racism and the Universal Design for Learning, tell us about how this book came about and your work on it.
So, universal design for learning is a framework that comes from 30 years of brain research on how humans learn, and then it informs how we teach. So, I started writing the book in 2017. This is a framework that I love. It is one that I feel like I have used throughout the years and I've learned about it. And I wanted to inform the field on how we can use it as a tool for liberation. And so I started writing this book in 2017, and I kind of struggled along the way to clar- clarify my voice, to find the angle or the pathway that I wanted to share. And I struggled along for 3 years. And in 2020, we had some cataclysmic events that took place,
Mhm,
right? And so
exactly.
in 2020, um, it was the weekend that George Floyd, he was murdered. And there were protests breaking out all over the country, all over the world.
Mm,
And I sat and I wept and I mourned and I grieved, but I knew that I needed to respond. And I
mm,
didn't want my response to be just a post that people argue back and forth on. I didn't want it to be one conversation that was here today and then forgotten tomorrow. I decided that I wanted my response to be this book to change the trajectory of education and educational practices for Black and Brown students forever. And so in 2020, I stopped battling with myself and my voice, and I finished putting the words together. I remember watching protests in particular in Atlanta, Georgia, in Washington, D.C., and my students that I had taught were leading those protests, were
oh,
informing others of how to respond. And I thought this is the power of a seed that when we build every student for the brilliance that lives in them, when we find ways for them to advocate for themselves, first in the classroom and then in the world, that would be the message that is undergirding the power of universal design for learning. It is advocacy, it is expert learning, it is shifting the world for yourself and then having others come alongside to shift with you. And so that's how um, the book came into existence, and with the message of universal design for learning and championing kids right where they are. Samaria Rice, who is the mother of Tamir Rice, wrote
yes.
the foreword to the book. She shares such powerful words and powerful questions, and I'm in awe of her always because she's taken what has been a terrible tragedy and turned it into a triumph in many ways, and she's pushing for that same triumph in many ways. So I'm so honored to have her partner with me and for CAST to publish this book.
Oh, wonderful. So much there. I just, yes, just to make sure, have a voice of a mother who had this loss, and just thinking about, how education can be liberation, right? And how we're giving our students, that agency, right? They already have their voices, but showing them how to use it. So amazing. Um, can you tell us a little bit about your education path, from, that brought you here, right? We know about your wonderful kindergarten teacher, but
Mhm,
can you tell us about like your high school and your college
mhm.
studies?
So there's a funny thing about our paths. We can have them planned out and think that we know the direction that we're going to go in. And then, oh, life just throws you those wonderful curveballs. And so I thought from the time I was a little girl, I had some dreams of being a writer, but my grandmother told me, listen, girl, writers, she said, "They don't make any money. You got to pick something else." So it's so funny. I said, "Okay, well, I have a love for math and a love for science, so maybe I'll be a scientist." And so when I was a very young girl, I decided I wanted to be an astronomer, not an astrologer, but an astronomer to study the stars and the weather patterns. And I really took a liking to all things in that area of science. And as I got older, when I was in the seventh grade, they saw that I had this capacity for math and science. So they said, you should be an engineer. And I was like, okay. So I started participating in programs geared toward engineering from the seventh grade all the way through the 12th grade. Participated. I took biochemistry for the first time when I was in the seventh grade. Loved it. Um, just learned a lot about how chemicals work and chemical reactions and how that fit into our everyday life. And so for from seventh through 12th grade, really focused in on engineering, took all the courses in high school around engineering. And I went to college on a full scholarship for engineering, chemical engineering. And it was in my internship at NASA that I was on the Advanced Communication Technology satellite. So I'm learning all of this about telemetry